Okay, with 17.3, we come to really the matter of the translation value of the imperfect conjugation. As I mentioned before, the imperfect represents action that is being viewed as not complete or not as the whole, but rather viewed from within as an in process, or it could also be habitual or repetitive action. So what are the ways that this can be translated? The imperfect's translation value could be future, and that is going to be the most common way to see the imperfect translated. That should be your first instinct. Now, by saying that, I might be setting you up for a fall, so just be careful. When I say it should be your first instinct, that doesn't mean that you should just always do it without thinking. You need to be thinking about the context, all right? If you take a look at our example here, we have Yizkor et ha-Torah, using the imperfect. So it's he will remember. Yizkor, he will remember the Torah. All right? Number two, it could be used to translate action that is continuous or repeated. So, this could be in the present or the past. All right, so I could say something like, John is playing basketball. John is playing basketball. And that is an action that is going on right now. So he's in a continuous state of playing basketball. Okay, and I could use the cal imperfect for that. So John is playing. Okay, but if I could also use the cal imperfect for a past and continuous action. It could be something like John was playing. Okay, so that's also possible. It could be used for repetitive action in the past. So I could say something like John would play basketball on Saturdays when he was in college. Okay? So John is not in college anymore. He was in college. That's past tense. And if I want to indicate that it is a repetitive action in the past, I could use this sort of auxiliary verb in English, John would play. Okay? I remember when I was in college, there were guys who would play the Indigo Girls music in their dorms on their guitars and try to impress all the ladies. Okay? I'm dating myself there. But again, using would is a way of indicating repetitive action in the past. Okay? So just be aware, the imperfect can be used for all these scenarios, and you have to be sensitive to the context to know which is the best way to translate it. All right, and then number three. This is a little bit harder for us to grasp as English speakers, but we have to cover it, and this is what's called the modal uses. Now, when we use the word modal here, we need to think in terms of modal auxiliary verbs. Okay? What are our modal auxiliary verbs? Verbs like would, should, must, may, and so forth. These are what sometimes we refer to as our helping verbs, right? In grammar, when we were in grammar school. All of these sort of nuances of the modal auxiliaries plus the main verb can be represented by an imperfect conjugation form in Hebrew. So if I took a verb like yishma, which is the cal imperfect, 3ms, okay, I could say he would, should, must, or may hear, right? Any of those modal auxiliary verbs could be used to translate the imperfect conjugation. If it's future, I'm going to use will or shall, right? But if it's a modal notion, then it's going to be should, would, must, may, could, and so forth. Okay? Those are the typical. Might. Might would be another modal auxiliary verb. All right? So those are possibilities there. The last thing in section 17.3 has to do with negating. How do we negate the imperfect verb? You simply stick the same negative particle in front of it that you did for the perfect. You use lo. We've learned lo, haven't we? Lo pakad, he did not appoint. Lo yifkod, he will not appoint. Okay? And the lo has a holum that is really a defectively spelled holum vav. So you could also, from time to time, not very frequently, see the lo spelled fully rather than defectively with the vav and the holum. Okay? So how would I translate this? That's a loaded question because any of these modal auxiliaries could work. It would be lo yishma is he would not hear, or he should not hear, or he must not hear. Okay? So that's how I would negate an imperfect. Just put the lo in front of it. Okay? In 17.4, we are introduced to a special hey. And this hey comes at the end of the word. Ross refers to it as the directive hey. I will sometimes refer to it as directional hey. All right, so just be aware. I will use those interchangeably. And here's the deal about this. This is a final hey. It's actually a final comets hey at the end of a word. That's why it's final. And it is unstressed. Unstressed or unaccented. Okay? When you have a final comets hey, unstressed at the end of a word, then it could be and you should understand it as the directive hey or the directional hey. And that means motion toward whatever that unaccented final comets hey is attached to. So, let's take a look at two words here just to compare, okay? So let's take the word isha for a minute. You see the comets hey on isha? Is that an unstressed final comets hey? No. The comets hey is stressed, isn't it? It's stressed. So this is not a directive hey. This is just the feminine singular ending on the word ish, isha, and it means a female man, also known as a woman. Okay? Isha. There you go. On the other hand, if I take a word like, how about, let's do yam, okay? The word yam is see. Okay, this is one of our newer words from the last few chapters. And then I take yam and I add a comets hey, but do not stress it. Yama. Yama. That comets hey is unstressed, isn't it? And it's been added to an existing word that normally wouldn't have a comets hey. This is the addition of a directive hey. And this means C word. That is to say, movement toward the sea. Okay? Anytime I add a directive hey to it, I mean movement towards whatever I've added that to. So C word. So adding the directive hey is like adding the suffix ward to a word that doesn't normally have it added to it. So yam, sea, yama, seaward, toward the sea. Okay? So bayit, what's bayit mean? House. So bayita would be houseward or to a house. You see? Yeah. Habayit is the house and habayita is to the house. Midbar. Midbar, wilderness, desert. Ha-midbara. Ha-midbara. The accent is not on the comets hey. Ha-mid-ba-ra. Okay, so accent is on the ba. Ha, mid, ba, ra. Okay, so that's telling me toward the desert or wilderness. Wilderness word, or to the desert, to the wilderness. Okay? If you have a feminine noun and you want to talk about motion toward it, you have to look or pay attention to how that feminine noun ends. So let's start with the word ear. Okay? Ear is the word for city, and if I want to say the city, it's ha ear. If I want to say to the city, I add a comma-te. So ear is feminine singular, but it does not have a comma-te ending to begin with, right? So when I add the comma-te, it's going to not be stressed, so the accent is not going to be final, so I have to put the accent mark here. So ha-ira, ha-ira. So that would be city word, right? City word, or to the city. So that's what a feminine singular noun would look like if it doesn't already start with a comma-te. But now let's take a look at this word give which was also one of our newer words from the last chapter of the chapter before. Give is the word for hill. Okay? Now, that does end with a comma-te in the normal form. It's a feminine singular noun. Okay? So how will I say hillward? John walked to the hill. He walked hillward. How would I do that? I would have to, can I add a comma-te to a hey that's not even a real consonant hey? No. Remember? Anytime I have a comma-te at the end, that hey is a mater hey. It's not a real hey. It's a fake hey. It's not a real consonant. So I can't add endings to maters that don't really exist as consonants. So what do you think I'm going to have to do? Well, I'm going to have to get rid of that comma-te and replace it with something that I can add a suffix to, right? And you remember how in when we added pronominal suffixes to feminine singular nouns that ended with a comma-te, I had to change it to ot, and then I could add the pronoun suffix. And that's what I'm going to have to do here. I'm going to have to change this comma-te to ot, and then I can add my unaccented comma-te. So give, ot, then I add the unaccented here, and since I'm stressing this, it's going to become long due to the tone. So it's give atta. Okay, give atta. So what's going to be helpful for you to be able to remember, and this is just a matter of learning your vocabulary, if you know that the word for hill is give and you see give atta, then you've got to know then that this is different from the lexical form, isn't it? It doesn't look like the lexical form. There's been some changes. I've had to add a tav to be able to add an unaccented comma-te. So this is give with a directive hey. So this is going to be hillward, or to the hill, or to a hill. If I add the article, then it would be to the hill. Okay? So that's what's going to happen. So if I wanted to say, hey, he went to the mayor, susa becomes susat, and then I add the unaccented comma-te, susata, susata. If I wanted to say he went to the horse, it would be susa. Okay? That means to the male horse. That's a directive comma-te ending. As opposed to simply susa, where the comma-te is accented, that's just a mare with no directive hey, right? Because that's stressed. Susa is to a horse, unaccented comma-te. So here, the big idea here is when you see that comma-te ending, if it is unaccented, you want to be thinking directive hey. If you see a comma-te at the end of something and it's stressed, then it's probably a feminine singular comma-te. All right? Okay.
Dr. Marshall?
Yes. That's a great question. No, it is actually, there are two prepositions that we have learned that can do the same thing. L and L, with an object, some noun that follows these. And those would mean the same thing as just putting a directive hey on a word and not using a preposition. You are absolutely right. So, yeah, that's terrific. Okay, good. Okay, 17.5 introduces us to a particular characteristic of Hebrew sentences, relative clauses, that are different from English. In English, we don't speak exactly this way, where in Hebrew, you can have a relative clause that modifies a noun, and then inside the relative clause, you get a resumptive pronoun that refers to the head or the antecedent. And here we'll jot down a quick example. Take a look at this example. We have Gedolah ha'isha is itself our main clause. Great is the woman, or the woman is great. Okay? Then I have an asher clause here that is modifying ha'isha. What is it about the woman that I'm asserting is great? The woman, asher katavti la. There's a little dot there. The woman that I wrote to her is great. Okay, so the woman is feminine singular. La is a third feminine singular pronoun that is referring to the head or the antecedent of the relative clause. We talked about relative clauses earlier, and as we had discussed then, relative clauses always modify nouns that are described as the head or the antecedent. So what's going on here is that in Hebrew, I will frequently see a pronoun that is referring to the same entity as the head. I'll see a pronoun inside the relative clause. It refers to the head. It will agree with it in gender and number, and it will seem redundant in English. And this is called a resumptive pronoun. Resumptive. It resumes the head inside the relative clause. So great is the woman who I wrote to her, and the her is the woman who is great. Okay? In English, I'm not going to use resumptive pronouns. I'm going to try to smooth this out, because even though this is beautiful Hebrew, it's really awkward English. So how will I say this? Great is the woman who I wrote to her. I would probably say something like, great is the woman to whom I wrote. Or, if you want to use normal but stylistically non-proper English, you might say, great is the woman I wrote to. Or great is the woman who I wrote to. Okay? But we don't use that resumptive pronoun in English. Okay? But you will frequently see it in Hebrew. There will not always be a resumptive pronoun that refers to the head, but there frequently is. In Hebrew, we also have resumptive adverbs. So you could have resumptive pronouns, or you could have resumptive adverbs, okay? And the resumptive adverb is sham. So take a look at the next example here. We have Ze hamakom. This is the place. Asher yashav sham. This is the place which he sat there. Well, that doesn't sound like good English, but it's beautiful Hebrew. We would just say this is the place where he sat. Okay? This is the place where he sat. So just keep in mind that we can have resumptive pronouns or adverbs in Hebrew relative clauses. And they'll sound funny to us, but they are good grammar in Hebrew.